Can you just make some kind of, I don't know, maybe do it, some kind of.
Typical announcements in the class. We have a new assignment
Because I was thinking that.
that I don't think has been posted. It needs to be posted. It's the same assignment. The same assignment as before. It hasn't been posted yet because I've been busy with other things, but it's exactly the same assignment if you want to get started. No new information that you're missing about the same assignment. Other than that, exams are off to grader, so we should have them back in the next couple days or so. We've been talking about different kinds of testing with respect to games. So we've talked about a couple of them so far, and we're about to get started on formal individual testing of different ways of testing your games. So formal individual testing is what you're going to do to highly break down a single player's experience with your game. So instead of doing something in parallel where you're collecting lots of data, you're collecting a significant amount of data on a single person's playthrough of your game. So the way that this is done is based on usability testing, how this has historically been done. And you're going to be recording different data streams at the same time of this single playthrough. So you should be recording the game screen. You want to know what is on the screen at the time that the player is seeing it. So you should have that stream and timestamp so that you can compare it to every other screen. So we also want to have video of the playtester and the playtester's actions. So what are the control mappings? What are the buttons that are being pressed? What is the playtester doing? So what is the input at any particular point in time? You want to have a camera on the playtester's face to be able to see what it is that they are feeling and experiencing as they're playing the game. So all of these are running streamed in parallel. Yeah.
Could it like over observation influence stuff with your playtest?
Absolutely. When you're, especially with the fact that this is a single playtester, but we talked about formal group testing. And if you care about sample size, then you're going for more the formal group testing approach. The formal individual testing is really to see kind of like the emotional effect of a particular, you want to see what the player is experiencing. If you want to gather data on exactly what inputs they use in a particular boss fight, what moves are they using, how frequently are they using them, then you can see when does panic set in compared to what buttons are they pressing. When a player panics, what moves are they using? There are kinds of data that you couldn't collect in formal group testing that you really could if you could hone in on a particular play session. And it's hard to parallelize this because it requires a lot of cameras already and a lot of input, a lot of setup. So usually this just happens with individuals, but if you can parallelize this, then you get some other very good data. You need to collect audio. What is the playtester saying or emoting? Anything that gives you insight into why they're doing what they're doing outside of just the emotions that are on their face. And of course, you should have data for the game as well. So logging timestamp data about any internal state in the game that you can also compare to timestamps of any of these cameras as well. So this can really help you to understand a game, but it requires immense technical setup and a good amount of expense to get set up to do this. So how would you run something like this? We want to make sure that the player doesn't feel like they're in a laboratory, but they're in a cave playing a game wherever they would otherwise be while experiencing this game. You want the setup to feel like that. So if it's a console game, there should be a couch and a large TV to emulate the console playing experience. If it's a PC game, they should have a chair, they should have some kind of office chair, some kind of desk, something that emulates what an at-home setup might look like. So even if it's not their own setup, it feels familiar, comfortable, and not like they're in the middle of a lab. You want to make sure that the playtester is thinking about the game and their experience with the game and not anything else that's going on with them. So provide any drinks, snacks, bathroom breaks. Again, anything other than that is a distraction from the game, and you don't want that if you're collecting the best data that you can. You should make sure that the playtester knows that their time is appreciated and also that you are recording them. Please make sure that you let them know you're recording them. And then ask them to think out loud. ask them to give you feedback, ask them again, as we talked about, to help you find the problems with the game. And after they've had a chance to get through their play session, come back and sit with them to interview them and discuss their experience. And you can gather data from the interview itself. It could either be a written survey, but if you're recording their emotion through the play session, you can pair the emotion to the emotion that is present in the after game interview as well. So if they exhibit surprise when they answer a question, you can map that to the surprise that they exhibited while playing the game with regards to thinking back over the experience. In fact, that surprise stuck with them. When I saw that, I was surprised. And you can see that from their response. Record all of this for later reference. Questions on formal individual testing. This is more so what game companies do rather than individuals, but it's important to note that if you end up at some game company and they want to do formal individual testing, that this is what you do. Other questions? Any questions? All right, large scale play testing. A lot of games that are made are meant to be played in parallel and lots of users at the same time. And for this, you need to make sure that you are ready with all of your hardware to be able to handle all of that. So first of all, make sure your game is in a beta phase before you start any online play tests. You don't want to be giving them a very raw game to be playing. Once you're doing this level of throughput, make sure that they're playing fairly close to the end game experience, meaning all bugs that you are aware of are fixed. They're not waiting to be fixed, but they're actually fixed. That doesn't mean that there aren't any bugs. There will probably still be bugs, but they're bugs that a large number of people have to find, or hardware limitations, like your server can't handle more than 20 connected individuals, and you just haven't had a chance to test that yet. You haven't had 20 interested individuals at the same time. You didn't want to emulate 20 accounts accessing it and doing random things at the same time. There's the closed online playtest where you invite some number of people to play your game. This means that you can limit the size of the playtest, which is good. That means that if you anticipate there being some server issues, you don't want to immediately throw 10,000 players at the server and then have to shut everything down while you fix it and then bring it back online and say, hey, players, now it's up again, please test it again. And then it still breaks because there are more issues than just the one that you initially found. So you can scale the size of your beta based on how many people you want playing at the same time. There is a limited that will be open to anyone who signs up, but there are a limited number of spaces available. So you have 500 invites, and the first 500 people to sign up. And eventually you can go open and any number of players can sign up, but you're still advertising the game is in beta, so expect some bugs. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you open it up to beta, and you would probably want whoever's testing it to give you detailed notes of how they reduced a bug so you can reproduce it yourself, right?
Yes.
So it's like, how would you, it seems like a mistake just to offer that out to anybody and just let it be a lottery then at that point. Because like, wouldn't
Right.
a generic person who just has an internet connection, it's like, they might be a terrible writer. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
they're not
absolutely.
documenting their
So
situation.
you could either have a bug snapshotting feature within the game. Some games that I know within their chat have something like a slash bug report or something of the sort that takes a dump of all of the instance data. So what were the assets that were generated? What is the exact map layout? What is the seed? Where is the character within the placement of that? And then you can play around from that with the developer. You just load their instance and then play around to see if you can reproduce the bug.
Gotcha.
It would also dump all of the information of the hardware of the player. So whenever you have options, you can obviously select what your hardware is. That means that when they connect, you have access to the hardware that they're using. So you can try to reproduce it with similar hardware if you have similar hardware available. But yeah, if they're open forum giving you feedback, yeah, you don't necessarily want that. You can specify in your beta signup the purpose of that beta signup. This isn't the final product. If you're looking to play the final product, wait for the full release. If you're interested in testing and providing feedback for the growth of this game, please sign up. try some new things, try some edge cases, try some things that aren't your usual play style, or just go through with your usual play style and we'll make sure that this works. Yeah, so hotkeys or chat commands or something for bug reports are very common in closed betas. Great question, though. Other thoughts or questions on online betas? Right. What data should you log? As you are making a game, what tools should you be writing and what data should you be collecting so that so that you can find bugs or that you can get good data for the development of your game. So any good game will record information about itself. Let's give you an example, kind of a simpler example rather than a more complicated example. So Crazy Cakes is a fast-paced bakery management game, and data logged for this are things like the timestamp of the log, the player user ID, so that way we can load up their account since it's timestamped. If you have any historical reference to save data, then you can load up the exact save file that they were using at the time that something happened. The difficulty level and round number that they were playing at, the final player score, and the amount of tokens or currency earned, number and type of power-ups picked up, and number of patrons served, the total number of desserts served to patrons. So something like this allows you to very easily log and have access to a large dump of just user data. You can use this user data for balancing. If, for instance, the final score is consistently higher than you expect for a particular level, then you see that the player's average skill has eclipsed what you anticipated it being when you came up with the difficulty, either meaning you should increase the difficulty that will lower their score, or something might need to be done about that. But it's based on just an analysis of this log data. What else could you determine from this? What other interesting questions or uses could you see from this precise data collected on a game like a bakery management game?
The time, like how many players are playing at a given time?
Yeah, you could, based on the timestamps of when players are finishing levels, yeah, you could factor out the timestamp to figure out what are the peak hours. If you're paying for server costs, when do you want to pay for more server space versus less server space? You could start saving money if you didn't just consistently have your maximum possible bandwidth at all hours of the day. Sure. What else?
You could snip out cheaters, like for example, if the amount of currency earned in the game is more than what the game should be providing the player.
Sure.
Flag player for cheating.
Sure. You could flag the player for cheating, but also you could become aware of the exploits that they are using through this data. Absolutely. Great point. What else? Yeah.
You feel like the most common used power-ups, or if you have choice between power-ups and when they chose most common?
Sure. Yeah, get a sense of which of your game objects are being used or ignored or prioritized. Does that map with what you thought when you designed them? It doesn't really identify why, but it at least allows you to start exploring why. Maybe more of them are being produced, which is a bug. So this particular site, hundreds of beta testers, in 3 days, they were able to generate 25,000 play sessions of data. And so what can we do? We can just throw the data from randomly selected sessions into Excel, sort them by the difficulty level and round number, analyze them based on difficulty, and then use that data to balance. You would produce some goal scores or some expert scores based on the goal being what's needed to clear the level, and an expert score saying this is someone who has highly trained at this game. This is what they should reasonably be able to score when they play this level. And that allows you to see what is the average player getting, what proportion of players are passing the level And what is the ceiling on the expected score that would be expected there? How many players are getting close to that expected ceiling based on that? Yeah, as mentioned, rarity and usefulness of each power-up. And then once balancing is complete, we can randomly select data from another 4,000 sessions and look at the new balance and determine whether the new balance was good for those 4,000 play sessions. You could do something like this. You could also use machine learning. We'll talk more about how you could use machine learning for stuff like this next quarter. Other types of game testing. We can do focus testing. So you'll bring in some people from the core demographic of the game that you want. So you'll select for a particular subset of people. We'll call that a focus group and get a reaction to aspects of the game. How does the game look? How does the game's premise feel? How does the game's music feel? Etc. And this kind of focus group can be used to determine things like who is going to be using this game? What is the target demographic for the development of the game? If you thought you were designing it for people who really liked horror, but you really find that the target demographic are people who like achievements and achieving things, then maybe that influences the future development of your game. You can use interest polling, which is reaching out via social network or crowdfunding to figure out how interested people are in your game. You can run an ad campaign and just figure out how many times was your ad clicked on. That gets a sense of how interested is the general community in your idea. And that can tell you how much you want to further invest in advertising at this level, or if you want to develop further and try again before, once you put out that feeler and get a sense that there is a level of commitment to your idea and interest in your idea, then you can start investing more heavily into it. Especially useful for small companies, making sure there's a market for the game in the first place. You don't want to spend a ton of time developing it just so that no one plays it. Then you're not going to get back your initial investment, and you'll run dry of money and not be able to fund your next game. And then you'll have to go do something else in this field. And help raise funds to complete the game if you're going through Kickstarter or some other crowdfunding source. It's not that expensive to make a Kickstarter, and determining whether your Kickstarter succeeds or fails can give you a sense of how interested the community is in your game in the first place. If there's enough interest, it'll generate enough funds to complete the game. If it doesn't generate enough interest or enough funds to complete the game, you refund everyone for the Kickstarter and move on to another idea or refine your idea before trying it again. And the upfront cost is not high. The worst case for a small company like this is pouring tons of money into the game and then not having anyone want to play your game or buy your game. There's usability testing. So this just looks at when you have a user interface, how well do people understand your user interface? So have them sit down and play your game for a small amount of time and then ask them questions about how to accomplish certain tasks within the game. If they figured out how to do that, they can respond to the usability testing questions. And if they can't, it tells you that you need to iterate on your user interface, making it clearer, add some additional tutorial elements, something like that. So it is important to do individual usability testing. Right, any questions on these so far? There's QA testing. So this is expert bug finders who are going to play your game and just start randomly doing things with the hopes of, they're usually very technically savvy and are familiar with fairly common technical exploits or bugs with regards to the tools that you used. So you would have someone who understands how Unity assets work and how Unity collisions work. And so they're going to attempt to produce all of the common collision bugs in Unity by playing your game. So there's an entire industry devoted to QA, and you will find there are experts for all sorts of quality assurance. Make sure that if you are not up to speed and have the time to be able to make sure that those bugs don't exist, maybe it's worth hiring a QA firm and having them rigorously test your product for kinds of common or not so common issues. So you will find the bug, discover and document the steps required to reproduce the bug. Once they have that, then they are the experts at writing and documenting those steps. If you don't have an automation for this, or the automation doesn't capture every possible case, they will expertly document how to reproduce. And then you can prioritize the bugs that are found by them based on, they'll give you a prioritization. This is an important thing for you to fix. So yes, in a smaller company or one who's trying to save a lot of money, this is often done by the development team. But you can also hire outside game testers. You probably want to fix as much as you possibly can before you hire QA. Otherwise, they have way too much work to do. You're going to spend a lot of money on bugs you could have found yourself. Yeah, exactly as Adam mentioned earlier. Players that play your game are not trained to generate good bug reports. Quality assurance, that is what they do for a living. So that can be very useful. Lots of free bug tracking tools are available. I would recommend finding and using good bug trackers for any larger scale product.
Which do game testers make usually? I feel like if you're like a professionally trained one, that it is like a skill set.
Yeah, it's an absolutely big skill set. Recognizing that the games industry doesn't have the most money, usually it's hard to find people who are willing to pay what your technical skill is worth. But the better you are, the more you can charge.
There are companies that have like trained game testers, and then like a successful game company would go to them like, please test our game.
Yeah, even some companies have them internally. So if you're developing for Microsoft, for instance, they have their internal QA team that just does quality assurance. They just try to break things and come up with the technical fixes to them. Sometimes your hired QA can also be very technical in the area of the game development and can even go in and identify, here's where the problem is in your code. Here's what fix you should implement. Of course, this wouldn't be complete without talking about automated testing. Those who have taken 350 with me, automated testing was a big part of that class. So writing software that finds bugs without requiring human input is extremely nice. You should be thinking about things like simulating rapid user input. So if the user has written a bot to do something, how does your game respond to hundreds of inputs per second? How does your server respond to a DDoS attack? Where does your server fail? What are the threshold points where a single user or distributed users can crash your server?
How do you track for bots? Where you just look for like inhuman behavior, like somebody playing 36 hours in a row, doing the same movements or something like that?
Yeah, oftentimes it will be, if there is a movement or a motion, it's going to be if it's every exactly same interval, move, 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 attack, 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 move, move, move. Players don't play like that. But even if there is, bots use offsets as well. So it'll be something like your default interval is 100 milliseconds, but it'll be plus or minus 10 milliseconds to evade something that recognizes for the exact behavior that you would expect.
Would you still require people to report a bot though to track specific behavior? Because it seems like it would be like impossible to keep a database record of every single action that a million players make. Yeah, like World of Warcraft.
It certainly can be. If you're tracking that kind of data, you can look for data anomalies and then flag accounts for further data collection based on that, and then you track that account behind the scenes for a bit longer, and then use a machine learning algorithm to determine yes or no.
Would it be like one guy has been in this abandoned outpost for like 2 months and he's the only guy or something like that?
But do know that there's a big difference between false positives and false negatives in this sense. If you take out a bot, that's good. If you fail to take out a bot, that's not a horrible thing. But if you ban a user, a real user, for botting when they're not actually botting, that can be a big black mark on your company and can create a big escalating problem where they report this on social media. Other people start to have a negative view of your company because of that behavior. So you should be you should be very certain that the behavior is a bot before you take action on a user account, because you don't want to put that threshold of false positives and false negatives are the same weight. So yeah, lots of companies specialize in automated testing and writing automated tests as well. And especially if your project is going to scale and you don't have automated testing expertise within yourself or a small company, it might be worth offloading that and creating automated testing tools for the development of your game. That can mean that it's a lot smoother from the end user perspective. Smooth games tend to gain more traction, tend to get more purchases, more subscriptions. And if it's not something you can do yourself, the upfront cost can absolutely be worth it in the long run.
I just want to say, I remember hearing something was like Counter-Strike 2, there was a genuine issue, there's a genuine issue with bots. I saw a video where it's like a real player just looked up, spin around, and in 10 seconds, they were just immediately banned. Just from the act of looking up and spinning around. Like, they weren't actually like a cheater. They just did that and it false flagged them just with that act.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of examples in the gaming industry of doing this right and doing this wrong. A lot of the examples of doing it right, you wouldn't be aware of because it doesn't end up affecting the player base. You do it right, no one should know that those bans are going on. Yeah.
For playtesting in general, do you usually organize the playtest results by the layered tetrad elements?
Potentially, I would organize them mostly by and even duplicate them for the kinds of questions that you're trying to answer. So what data are you trying to collect on your game? There should be questions that you are aiming to get answers to. And you can also
of the framework, or
yeah, potentially. But even business, I would tie it more so to business, the business decisions that need to be made for the game. Like, when do we greenlight this? How do we decide to keep investing in the development of this game? We need to make sure that we reach these thresholds. We need to make sure that we reach this level of player interest. We need to make sure that the game is that players who play the first level play through to the fourth level with 75% retention. Those kinds of business questions are the questions that you're most likely logging so that you can make monetary decisions. This turns into a business class way quicker than I like it to. Yeah, this is the end of testing. More details about testing would come from other classes that deal with in more detail about software testing. So the purpose of this unit was mostly to show how does game testing deviate from other software's testing. Okay. It's time for us to move to a unit on game balance. Okay. We're actually going to spend quite a bit of time in this class talking about game balance. Not necessarily here, we'll come back to it at a couple of places, but game balance is something that I find is a huge deal in video games. Absolutely huge deal. It can make or break an experience that is otherwise great or even otherwise poor. It can make a poor game viable, and it can make what is otherwise a great game completely unplayable. So, game balance. Let's try to define game balance succinctly. Like, how are we measuring game balance, and what do we use to determine whether a game is balanced or not?
If you have like resources defined, you don't want, I guess just think of it like D&D terms. You don't want one class to be able to completely dominate all your resources with no consequences.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
There has to be a drawback to every positive somehow.
Okay, yeah, so positives have kind of equal and opposite drawbacks potentially.
I mean, I think like game balance stuff definitely depends on like what you're doing as well, like how strict you need the game balance to be. Like, does everything need to be on the same playing field or like in the same like vibes of like, is it viable? But it's at least for me, it's the different ideas of like, trying to make things seem more fair across the board or allowing different styles of play to be realized and not feel like they're handicapping themselves.
Okay, so lots to unpack there. I like the different possible play styles. I guess the question that I would ask people is game balance the same thing in a multiplayer game and a single player game? How could we incorporate both of those ideas into this idea of balance?
Well, so for the idea with like the multiplayer, right? Like if you go back to that idea of like a class, there might be like a class a person can play, and it might be an unpopular class, but it completely dominates all the popular classes. So then the people that want to play the popular class, they can be annoyed at that other class, but it's like that is the balance. They have to adapt their play style to respond to that. You can't punish that person for finding the loophole, you know?
Okay, so something like a numerical versus play style distinction.
I like a very simple answer, but I feel like when it comes to game balance, it's a question of what is the obvious answer, if that makes sense. Like when you play like single player or multiplayer, like what is the one thing that you can pick that's always gonna work? And I sort of think, with his comment on multiplayer, it's like you see this a lot with like tournaments. Like what is like Overwatch? What is the one if you want to win, what is the number one answer? You play the GOATS meta. And I think something like that with like single player games, where like if you want to beat every battle, you pick the one thing that consistently sweeps every enemy.
From the design perspective, is a meta a good thing?
I would, or in terms of like I'm thinking about multiplayer stuff because obviously when it comes to multiplayer, it's like no, because it means it's boring to watch.
It means it's potentially unbalanced. It means that players have a reason to pick something over something else. So design-wise, you would want to minimize the meta, which means that there's a distribution of what players can choose and how they interact with that. In single-player games, is a meta a good thing?
Oh, it doesn't matter, really.
Yeah, it's not hugely consequential if there is a right choice and a wrong choice.
It's almost funner, right? Because like in a game, you reach that level of like omnipotence. It's like it's kind of fun, you know?
Yeah, it absolutely can feel like if you are unbalanced against the game, it's rewarding you for your past choices.
I think all of this is getting down to game balance is making sure that the game is fun for your player base.
Yeah.
Because in single player, like you said, it doesn't really matter if there's a meta, and a lot of players find it fun that there is one. In multiplayer, it's pretty much the opposite, where meta can destroy the fun because players optimize the ability to have that with everything. And in multiplayer environments, you then end up being hazed if you don't like or find meta fun.
Right. Yeah. So I definitely think that, yeah.
What's meta?
It's what the community has decided is the right choice or the most powerful choice. And oftentimes it dominates. It's a strategy that dominates other choices or other strategies.
Well, in some games, like you were asking on the question of whether or not a game having meta is a good thing. In some games like chess, the meta has been studied for hundreds of years.
Right.
And still debated which is the best strategy
in
those situations.
Yeah, so that leads to a game that is highly balanced, is that even after a very long period of time, there is intellectual discussion about good decisions and bad decisions. And the branching factor of chess is so high that you don't find yourself in exactly the same position twice, ever, really.
You think that's an accident?
Openings.
That level of balance? That couldn't have been intentional. Like whoever came up with that game.
It was probably highly, it's so mirrored and so simple that it really shows the power of exponential growth more than just about anything that's easy to point out. I find that simple rules can beget complex strategies in a very simple play environment. And chess is just, it's really hard to think of. Was that meant to be, or did we determine that, wow, what we thought was going to be a relatively simple game actually has significant complexity? It's a great question. I don't know the answer.
I mean, the thing is with chess, it's also evolved over like hundreds of years from like its original conception.
Yeah.
So it probably evolved to be more fun and balanced as time has gone on.
Even if we look back thousands of years, we have exactly the same game board. Nothing has changed over a very long period of time with the game, which means that people haven't either found ways to improve it or the need to improve it. That there's still a significant challenge at being good at this very basic game, at least in terms of its rules. But still, no one on personas when they should. So this one should be pretty obvious. Balance mean the same thing to everyone. And kind of similarly to how being fun isn't the same to everyone, especially in single player games, there will be vastly different experiences and opinions on what is balance. But in multiplayer, you will also feel a difference in balance just when it comes to player skill. Whatever player skill is the difference maker in a multiplayer game, one player will feel like it's balanced and one player will feel like it's not. How does a novice work with someone who's been playing the game for a long time? Do you need things like matchmaking in order to create balance in your game where you're matching similarly skilled players to other similarly skilled players? So that actually leads right into variables a designer has when controlling the balance of the game. So obviously you can balance any numerical property of the game, but you can also do things like matchmaking. What else?
Well, this doesn't really lead into that exact question, but I was thinking about balancing, and even though it's like ill-defined right now, it's like, surely it would be possible to like ruin your game through balancing, because now there's no way to get an advantage of resources for any player. So it's like, it kind of just ruins your whole system somehow.
Choices need to have consequence, but trying to create multiple paths through the gameplay where optimal decisions lead to relatively similar power levels, that's the real challenge. So then players feel like they have a choice. The choice matters, and it changes the choices that they make later on. But in the end, it kind of comes back together and creates a fun and engaging experience.
On the topic of balance, though, I guess you could, go back to that class system. You don't have to take anything away from like the powerful class, but you could maybe introduce or modify skills from weaker classes that pinpoint the weakness in the stronger class. So then they become like a viable thing.
Right. So we will actually talk about that, how exactly to identify that and how to, like, what mathematical structures are useful for fixing something like that. Yeah, that's a great point.
That really reminds me of the balance in Hell Final Fantasy 14 is in right now, because the combat system is currently being reworked over the course of 2 expansions, including all of the jobs. And they're also trying to figure out how to balance money sinks right now, because there's too many players that have been playing for ages that have literally maxed out their money at $1 billion. And
We'll talk about those as well. In fact, we'll do an entire unit on game economies and everything you can do with regards to game economies, because that's in multiplayer games especially, that's a huge topic.
the big thing that people have been really pissed about lately is the tanks and one of the mages. Because all the tanks are starting to feel like the same one, because every time they try to give something to a tank that's weak, it just ends up kind of recreating the same thing that another tank had. And then there was one mage that was known for being like very immobile at the cost of having the highest damage output in the game. And it was considered the most mobile mage with virtual minimum cap on damage output skill, which has pushed other mages basically into sidelines, except for like one niche situation.
Hard to do from a developer's perspective when you have a game that is that complicated.
Yeah, I just want to mention like a balance thing I remember. I know that there's an RPG where it's like there's like you get a really good healing item if you go out of your way to like cook a bunch of stuff, and like there some like modders were talking about balancing it by making it a lot worse or something like that. And you know, it's kind of an interesting. Well, I kind of balked at the idea. There's kind of an interesting question of like, you know, is this really good, powerful healing item overpowered me, even though I have to go out of my way, very out of my way to get the ingredients for it, because I don't want to bother with the cooking system and maybe get something a bit substantial.
That's an interesting design question.
Yeah, it's like
How
this.
much player effort is needed in order to circumvent the balance? How much balance is effort worth? In general, that's a difficult question to answer. So first thing to note, and I think we're seeing this in some of our responses, is balance is certainly a gray area, but there are things that we can do about this to understand balance and that we can do when we identify balance related problems in our games. Next note is it's very contextually sensitive, which means that where you are in the game, the balance formula may change. What is considered balanced or not might be different sets of variables. So we should be aware of the context of our balance and approach balance in a way that makes sense. So kinds of game balance. There's your mathematical balance. So aspects of your mathematical balance include things like your level curve, meaning how much experience is needed to reach a level. How does that change as you go from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, level 10 to level 11, etc. The cost of items in terms of some currency or in terms of some time or some other variable that might relate to a reasonable cost of an item. If you are grinding enemies in a JRPG and using it to acquire the items that are dropped, then the cost is mostly in time, not in currency. Cost in hit points, so balance of hit points. Item rarity and scarcity. All of these are formulas or formulaic in nature and can be used to model balance. However it is that you design how these items drop or how much health an enemy has as the game progresses, as levels progress, all of that fits to some mathematical function. So what can we do about understanding game balance? We need to understand how functions relate to each other, how numbers relate to each other, rates of growth. It turns out that looking at asymptotic rates of growth back in data structures and algorithms comes in a lot of handy here. This is going to be very useful to us when looking at, do we want something like level curves to be quadratic, cubic, exponential, linear? What are the reasons you might pick each of those, and how does the rest of the game fit around the decisions that you make with regards to some of these mathematical decisions? We need to understand probability and conditional probability in order to be able to make understandings of, given that the player is in this area, how long do they need to farm in order to acquire this item for the first time on average? Maybe that dictates the drop rate of the item. How many battles do we want the user engaging with? If they run through the level, how many battles do they engage with? If they're taking it fairly slow and exploring every single corner, how many battles are they engaging with? How likely is each different player type to end up with that item by the time they reach the end of this level? Which means moving forward, how likely is that player to have that item? All of this makes sense when you're designing levels for your game. There are also cost curves. We will talk about that for things like, how does the rate of growth of weapon sales, for instance, when you reach a new town or you have the ability to upgrade in some capacity, how does the rate of those costs increase? Just statistics in general. You can't know too much math to design systems that feel very fluid. And what's amazing is the player doesn't have to have any hint of the underlying math to enjoy the game, but it's so much more important from a designer's perspective than it is from the player's perspective. A good system, player doesn't understand the math behind it, it just feels good. But from a designer's perspective, what math and combination of math feels good to a player? We need some ability to bridge that gap. So that's math-related balance. There's difficulty-related balance. So how does difficulty change over time? How are we increasing the game challenge to compensate for increases to the player's skill? If in general, we could say there is minimal difference between how challenging a game is and a player's skill level, then we can call the game balanced. Go back to that flow diagram and making sure that we're designing a game to hit that center flow. And of course, we can break balance with difficulty spikes, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not. There are good and bad difficulty spikes. You run into a boss, that is a difficulty spike. If it's a manageable difficulty spike, then that can help teach the player new ways of engaging with the mechanics, because the way that they've been playing the game doesn't work as well anymore. It can also be a huge difficulty spike, making it nearly impossible for a player to manage it, which could lead to frustration and then quitting the game. So super conditional on the target audience. If you're designing a Souls-like, then the people you're designing this for will be much more tolerant to difficulty spikes. If you're designing it for a casual audience or children, they will be much less able to handle difficulty spikes. So kind of the extremes of this. Souls-likes, very punishing in difficulty, are meant to be played by people who want to experience difficulty for the pleasure of overcoming that difficulty.
How does balance work for them? Because technically you can play those games without getting hit. So
Yeah.
it's like you could be good enough to where it doesn't matter what your stats are. Basically.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. I see that in lots of, even in action RPGs, you can see boss runs of naked characters that aren't using a weapon or any armor whatsoever, defeat endgame bosses. It may take 20 minutes, but they're skilled enough to just avoid the attack patterns. So yeah, the skill cap certainly is extremely high, but what can you expect of your player at a certain point in time? What is balanced to a player base that likes that punishing difficulty? Cozy games are the other extreme to that. They're played mainly because people don't like difficulty and want to experience something like just numerical progression or story progression, or a game where they have plentiful choice, and that choice leads to not necessarily difficulty, but a bunch of different outcomes. Roguelikes, where the difficulty is increasing and static, and you must restart in order to have another attempt at a particular roadblock. So player skill is really the only bar to playing, to getting past something in a roguelike. Obviously, the whole roguelite genre evolved from that, kind of combining roguelikes and progression. But another interesting question. Target difficulty of games changed over time. How familiar are we with games released in the 80s and 90s and 2000s and 2010s? Any thoughts on what that curve would look like?
It's probably flattened out, right? Because now they're not trying to get money from you. They wanted you to lose, right? That's
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, there's a reason why the term Nintendo hard exists.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I know for a fact that like I think some games were I know for a fact like some games were made very hard on specific principles so that like rental services can get more money out of you. So it's like you buy the game, it is blisteringly hard. You want to play it again, so you rent it out again to keep trying to finish it.
there might have been less resources to balance it too. Like it's like memory's
Yeah.
so small that it's like the game just has to be hard if you're gonna fit in all the stuff.
And you're going to release it. You release it once. You don't get to patch it later. So you do your best attempt, and then here you go.
I mean, the other thing that they had to deal with is because the games are so relatively short compared to games nowadays,
Yeah.
that's like how you pad the time. Well, you just have difficulties, but it's now halfway in the middle of it, then your 2 hour game now instantly becomes like it will take like more than a weekend at least. So your parents can be happier with the purchase that they made.
In general, we've moved toward more options in difficulty. It used to be that a game was the game, and it was a bragging right to say that you had beaten a difficult game because there was no other easier path through that game. But we've learned that accessibility breeds money. So you add options to your game, more and more players will play your game and choose the path through that game that they would prefer. And that leads to additional sales. But yeah, games overall, we're getting easier and easier and easier, but certain subgenres have kind of branched off of that. And there's been a movement back towards the especially difficult game. That's been interesting to see happen in real time. All right, we will come back and talk about progression-based game balance and dive into a lot more on game balance and probably start getting into some interesting games that we're going to play and start thinking about the balance of that over the next couple of days.